Alaska Airlines has teamed up with Hawaiian Airlines to create new nonstop international flights. Go to alaskaair.com or hawaiianairlines.com, and I'll tell you more details later in the show. I'm Rachel Belle, and this is Your Last Meal, the show where celebrities share stories about the foods they love most, and we dig into the history, culture, or science of those meals with experts from around the world. Today on the program, singer-songwriter Kevin Morby.
And this is a photograph, a window to the past, of your mother in a skirt. In the cool Kentucky day.
Kevin has released 7 solo albums, and you're hearing the title track from his latest record, This is a Photograph. Kevin is obsessed with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, both the classic PB&J and his own very unorthodox combinations. Turns out, you weirdos also like to stick a bunch of random stuff between peanut butter and bread.
I've done peanut butter and bok choy, peanut butter and kale.
We'll hear a few of your voice messages later in the show. We'll also hear from Len Kretschmann, co-inventor of Uncrustables, who tells us why America needed a pre-made PB&J. And journalist and peanut butter sandwich adorer Linda Rodriguez-McRobbie shares a little PB&J history and her experience being an American expat living in a country that doesn't eat or understand the sandwich.
I think that it is the best example of American ingenuity in cuisine. Peanut butter and jelly, that is American. That's more American than apple pie.
So yeah, this is a peanut butter and jelly episode. First time we've done one since Dan Savage was on the podcast in November 2016. That is a good episode. Go back and listen after this one. But right now, let's jump right in with Kevin Morby.
Gotta go in my eyes. She said,
Tell me about your love/obsession with PB&Js.
I guess, it all started when I was a child, as it does for most kids. When I started touring with my band, The Babies, I remember it's like the early days of Twitter. And I remember like having a stomachache or something on this tour and tweeting if anyone wants to get on the guest list tonight, like bring me a peanut butter and jelly. And shortly after that, I started putting it on the writer. I was like, I find it such a fascinating food. It's sort of like a dessert, but it's also sort of like a meal. It's just very versatile. You can kind of make it healthy or you can make it really unhealthy. And I just find it to be this very, very extremely comforting thing. And there's also this sort of sense memory of like eating it, for school lunch as a child or something. But I just love peanut butter and jellies. And then I sort of started, it sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, I started to get into like the culture of them, reading about like who else likes peanut butter and jellies. And I think the thing I found most was that athletes love them. A lot of athletes that I love, I was reading about their sort of routines and like how they prefer their peanut butter and jelly and at what point they eat them before a game or during a game. Oftentimes I compare musicians to athletes because, we travel and what we do sort of requires some physicality. And a peanut butter and jelly is just a perfect thing to have on the rider because it can replace a meal and it's good stage feel.
And you're in the right place to be looking up the history of your favorite foods because that's all that we do here. So it's a safe space.
Yes, when I got asked to be on this podcast, one of my favorite questions that I ask people often is, what would your last meal or what would your death row meal be?
Okay, so this is a topic that you immerse yourself with already. Tell me about your perfect PB&J.
My perfect PB&J. That's such a great question because, like most things, I think it just depends on my mood. But I think, if it was going to be my last PB&J, if we were to frame it like that, I think what it would be, I would go like full childhood if it was my last peanut butter and jelly. So I would get like Wonder white bread and I think just like Welch's grape jelly and then I guess like some Skippy or Jif or whatever sort of generic peanut butter you'd find in the Midwest. And I think I'd go creamy, even though these days I prefer crunchy. But if it's not my last peanut butter and jelly and I'm just making one, then I would say like a raspberry or strawberry jam, crunchy peanut butter, and still on white bread. I still prefer the white bread if we're going PB&J.
Yeah, I saw on Instagram you were posting a video about a PB&J you were making, and you were very quick to point out, like, I don't eat like a baby. I'm not a child, but there's just, there's highs and lows in life. And just because you like squishy white bread doesn't mean that you don't have good taste in other arenas.
Absolutely. I think, It's like when someone asks you like, what are your favorite movies or something? And it's like, there's the movies that I think are the best movies ever made. And then there's the movies that I've watched the most time, like
Yes.
I think, Dumb and Dumber, like that's my peanut butter and jelly of movies, and it's
Yeah.
like, but it's still in my life holds as much significance as, a French art film or something. So yeah, peanut butter and jelly is that thing. But lately I've been really exploring. My girlfriend recently got this sort of like hot honey chili paste, and I've been putting that on peanut butter and
Oh,
jelly.
that sounds good.
Like a fig spread and then like almond butter. So, you can get sort of exotic with it.
Hot honey and fig jam is tame compared to the other stuff Kevin adds to his peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Scrambled eggs or a fried egg. A fried egg seems to scare people less when I tell them about it. And I think the mental gymnastics that you can do for this is just that the sort of palette of flavors is very similar to pad thai. It's like a peanutty sweet thing, and there's scrambled eggs in pad thai often. And then I've also been adding kimchi, which I think really elevates it. I don't know. I've been into this. I've been exploring this lately. The real key is you just really have to toast the bread, or else it's too many like soft foods.
Yeah.
The bread being crunchy is essential.
The pad thai reference totally pulls it together because peanut butter is a savory food, but we do think of it as more of something you would put in a dessert or a sweet thing. But you're right, like peanut sauce is a savory thing.
Totally. And, I guess the kimchi thing probably makes sense to people because it's like sort of providing like a hot sauce, which again, to a pad thai, if you put hot sauce or sriracha on it or something, that makes sense to people. Also, you can put bacon in there. I don't know. You can go nuts on this thing.
And you've made a t-shirt out of this sandwich as well. It's on your merch page.
Yeah, which is not selling, which we made all this special merch for the end of the year and everything's selling, but that I'm like, people are afraid. They're afraid of this. I mean, it's a crazy shirt. It's a absolutely psychotic shirt, but the ones who are brave enough to wear it, will be known as my true fans.
On the front of the t-shirt, there's a picture of the sandwich and it says peanut butter, jelly, and eggs. On the back, you'll find the recipe. I like peanut butter and pickles, peanut butter, cheddar cheese and pickles. And when I was a kid and didn't like jam, I preferred peanut butter and honey. But I rarely eat a peanut butter sandwich. Maybe only once or twice a year. If I go hiking with my friend Tina, she usually offers to make me one. And I love when it gets all squished flat on the bottom of my backpack. My friend and former Cairo radio colleague Dave Ross has made dozens and dozens of PB&Js for hiking trips. And just like you hear these stories of people never forgetting where they were when they heard JFK died or where they were when their parents got a divorce, I will never forget the moment he told me he puts bok choy in his sandwiches.
I used to be in charge of making PB&Js for our hikes. And it's a delicious sandwich for a hike because by the time you eat lunch, it's been in the backpack for 2.5 hours and it's nice and squishy and the flavors have melded, but there's no crunch. So I wanted to put some crunch into our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So I started adding different layers of vegetable matter, basically. So I've done peanut butter and bok choy. I've done peanut butter and chard, peanut butter and kale, peanut butter and pickles, of course, and peanut butter and bananas. But I think the favorite was when I would do peanut butter with Cheerios and chocolate chips. That's sort of a poor man's chocolate chip cookie, but it was great because you didn't know from bite to bite whether you're going to get the Cheerio or the chocolate chip. So it added some suspense to the lunch on the summit. And also very, very good for you.
A couple months ago, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, the very infrequently broadcast Home Cooking with Samin Nosrat and Rishikesh Hirway. And Rishi was telling Samin about what he ate before they started recording the show.
A sandwich with peanut butter, avocado.
What?
It gets weirder than that.
This is disgusting.
No, it sounds so gross, but it's actually good. So, okay, step one, I crisp up some kale in the frying pan. And while that's going, I toast some bread and then avocado, peanut butter, crispy kale, sprinkle a little salt on the avocado, and then hot sauce.
Well, honestly, truly, the only thing I just don't understand is the peanut butter. I understand your obsession with protein, so I'm guessing that's where that...
Yeah.
But I'm like truly like discombobulated of an avocado and peanut butter combo.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that it would work, but it does.
Were you stoned when you decided to make this for the first time?
No.
Oh my God.
Someday I'll make you one of these.
And I won't eat it.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, we got scrambled eggs, kimchi, kale, avocado, bok choy. But my friend Kennedy's childhood PB&J is my favorite.
Hi, Rachel. It's your friend Kennedy. So when my brothers and I were kids in the 80s, we had a regular meal in rotation called hot dog soup. And the ingredients to hot dog soup is a cut up hot dog, a thing of top ramen, and some frozen vegetables. And my parents would always serve this to us with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And every time we would dip our sandwich in the soup. It was sort of like a 9-year-old's version of an au jus sandwich or something. And that was just how we ate it. And I can still remember the flavor of it, PB&J and salty broth. Turns out hot dog soup isn't a thing. And dipping your PB&J in top ramen / hot dog broth is also not a thing. And, you know, we found this out as we grew up and would tell people about our hot dog soup as a kid, and everyone is super grossed out by it. But I have fond memories of hot dog soup, and I look forward to introducing it to my own children. Love you. Bye.
Hey Rachel, it's Renee. So as a kid growing up, my dad made us a lot of sandwiches where I guess you could say mayonnaise was an unexpected feature. He'd start with an unassuming piece of white bread, some peanut butter, sliced bananas, and then on the accompanying top slice of bread, he would add a thin layer of mayonnaise. This might sound gross to some, but there was something about the sweetness of the banana and the richness of the peanut butter, and then the saltiness and the creaminess of the mayonnaise that just made some kind of magic, and it was always delicious. It just screams 80s nostalgia for me.
Hi, I'm Sandy. I live in Port Townsend, and a chef I once worked with suggested peanut butter with sriracha and pickles, and I have been eating that ever since.
Earlier in the show, Kevin mentioned that athletes eat a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But what they're really chowing down on is Uncrustables. Like a freakishly large amount of Uncrustables. A product that was never meant to be sold in grocery stores. I'll tell you the story after the break. Imagine boarding an Alaska Airlines flight in Seattle, and just 10 hours later, you're in Tokyo, ready to eat your weight in convenience store onigiri and steamy tonkotsu ramen. No stops, no layovers. Well, starting May 12th, Alaska Airlines is offering exactly that. Alaska has teamed up with Hawaiian Airlines, and this October, they're also starting nonstop service between Seattle and Seoul, South Korea. You can even treat yourself to seats that lie flat in the premium cabin. Book your trip now at alaskaair.com or hawaiianairlines.com. Have you ever had an Uncrustable? I have not. But I do know that they are round, crustless peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with sealed edges, made by Smuckers and sold in grocery stores' freezer sections. And NFL players eat so many of them that The Athletic, which is the sports journalism hub of the New York Times, did an investigative piece on the topic. Jason Jenks wrote an article called, Wait, NFL players eat how many Uncrustables? In October 2024. He asked NFL teams to send in their Uncrustables data, and 24 out of 32 teams agreed to participate. The data shows those 24 teams go through 3,600 to 4,300 Uncrustables a week. The Athletic says, quote, when you factor in training camps and the teams that did not share their data, NFL teams easily go through at least 80,000 Uncrustables a year. One NFL team eats way more Uncrustables than any other. The Denver Broncos, 700 a week. The Seattle Seahawks come in second with 320 Uncrustables a week. On his podcast, Super Bowl champion, Kansas City Chiefs tight end, and Taylor Swift's boyfriend, Travis Kelce, admitted he eats more Uncrustables than, quote, anything else in the world.
We called it the Incredible Uncrustable. And I can tell you right now, it was an 11-year-old boy that named it. I was standing in the kitchen with one of my partners at the time, and we asked his son, what would you call this thing? He didn't even hesitate. He looked at it and he says, the Incredible Uncrustable. And it's like, done.
That's Len Kretschmann, co-creator of Uncrustables.
You can say inventor, but I didn't really invent much because Mom's been cutting crust off of sandwiches for 100 years before we did this. We just figured out how to turn it into a product that's solved a problem for our customer base.
Making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is so easy. It's, the most basic thing you can make. I'm sure it's the first thing a lot of kids have, quote, cooked in their lives. So I'm curious about the idea of having a pre-made peanut butter and jelly sandwich, how you came to that.
You're exactly right, Rachel. It's really easy to make one in your kitchen. Try to make 750 of them in a school kitchen. That's a different story.
Len has been in the public school food business for 30 years. He creates products that make life easier for folks working in school kitchens. And that's exactly what the Incredible Uncrustable was intended to do. Len says his wife, Emily, came up with the idea for a crustless peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the mid-90s. She handed the idea over to him to commercialize for Minnesota schools, which is where they were living at the time.
Anything that we've ever developed, literally my wife and I have developed in our kitchen.
The Incredible Uncrustable solved a problem for schools. It was never meant to be a product that you would find in the grocery store. But a few years in, Smucker's caught wind and bought the brand. But they wanted to change the name.
They did a focus group with about 100 moms, and they had all these different names that they were throwing out. And then at the end, they say, what about the Uncrustable? And all the moms' hands went up. And so they stuck with the name and proven to be a pretty good one.
By the time Smucker's bought Uncrustables, Len and Emily had already worked out all the kinks.
When we first started making it, we made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich like anyone would. You put peanut butter and then jelly and you put the bread together. Well, that doesn't work because the jelly leaches through the bread. It's gross. So it didn't take us very long to figure out that we had to encase the jelly inside the peanut butter. And the peanut butter made a great barrier because it's oily.
How did you choose round instead of just cutting the crust off and having it be square?
We decided on round because the sun's round, the earth's round, the moon's round, and your head is round. It's our favorite shape. That's the logic. That's the science that went into choosing that the product should be round.
What is your personal relationship with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
I went 20 years without eating peanut butter. The reason, Rachel, is when you're in the food business and you come home and you smell like peanut butter, you got equipment that's squirting it. It's on your smock, it's on your hairnet. You'd smell that every single day and it's just like, no, I don't want anything to do with that.
Now that you're able to eat it again, what is your perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
I'm old fashioned. I like a piece of toast with a thin coat of butter on it and then the peanut butter, but you got to make sure the toast is still hot so the peanut butter melts. And my other thing is every last teeny bit of the bread has to be covered.
When Len was in college, he was a wide receiver at North Dakota State. How does that make you feel, just knowing that this product you invented in your kitchen that was going to elementary schools is now in the bellies of all of these NFL players?
I like the idea, and it's a heck of a lot better than an orange slice, because that's what they used to give us when I played.
Yeah.
And it's like you get in there and it's orange slices. I never touched them. It's a good source of protein and carbohydrate, and they're easy, and I can see why players would eat one at halftime.
Okay, don't tell Len, but there's actually another article on The Athletic all about the NFL and orange slices. In 2021, they reported, quote, it is actually a requirement in the NFL's game operations manual that each home team provide 3 dozen sliced oranges for halftime for the visiting team. Home teams must also provide, amongst other things, 500 pounds of ice, 3 cartons of gum, 1 large pot of coffee, 150 washcloths, and 3 dozen bananas. Let's check back in with Kevin. One more important, very important PB&J question. How do you cut yours, if at all?
That's a great question. That's one of those things that when I was researching athletes, who likes it diagonal, who likes it down the middle. If I were to cut it diagonal. Also, a thing I wanted to bring up, because in recent history, I've toured with two different Australians. This woman, Jess Ribeiro, recently was telling me about sort of the Australian version of a PB&J called fairy bread, which I never heard of.
Oh, yeah, with the chocolate sprinkles?
Yeah, with sprinkles on it. And I guess it's just really butter and sprinkles. And I was like, that sounds so crazy to me, but I guess PB&J sounds crazy to you guys. But also last year, I was on tour with this woman, Lo Carmen, who was opening the shows, and she's so wonderful. And Lo, she made a PB&J backstage one day, and she was like, took a bite of it, and I like watched her take this bite, and she was like, she's like, this is pretty good. I've never had a PB&J before. And I was like, I just watched you take your first bite of peanut butter and jelly. It was really great. Shout out to Lo.
Yeah, I know, because it's something here that everybody had in their lunchbox. So yeah, watching an adult try something from your childhood that's so ubiquitous, I totally get that. I lived in Japan and I had a Kiwi coworker, and I watched him try his first s'more, and it was the same thing. And he was like, this is so weird. And it's like, you have to think about, you're like, yeah, it is kind of weird. I never thought about that before.
Yeah. When you break it down to its parts, it's pretty strange.
Peanut butter and jelly is a uniquely American food, which is what journalist Linda Rodriguez McRobbie discovered when she moved to England.
I love peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I grew up on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. They were a massive part of my childhood and young adulthood, and frankly, adulthood as well. But here in the UK, the combination of peanut butter and jelly is not popular. And I think part of this also has to do with what they think jelly is. So when you say peanut butter and jelly, they're picturing essentially peanut butter and Jell-O, because jelly is Jell-O. It's a gelatin-based dessert that's typically served at children's birthday parties. But then even when you sort of continue to explain, peanut butter and jelly is actually peanut butter and jam, and it's delicious and it's amazing, the look of skepticism on their face is something to behold.
Linda wrote a piece for the Saturday Evening Post called PB&J, An American Love Story, and she attempts to lay out the sandwich's history. It's hard to know exactly when peanut butter started dating jelly. Historians say jam could be at least as old as the Roman Empire. But to make a PB&J, all the components needed to exist, including peanut butter and sliced bread.
About 1894, there was a businessman in St. Louis, a guy called George Bale, who allegedly invented peanut butter, but it was still not super popular yet. It was a kind of an oddity. Just about a year later, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, who's famous for Kellogg's cornflakes, who was also a bit bonkers. Was one of sort of the first kind of wellness gurus, and he was a big fan of Fletcherism, which was this idea that you needed to chew your food to essentially completely disintegrate it before you swallowed it, and that was going to be helpful for digestion. So he invented this nut meal that was basically peanut butter and sold it to his very rich clients who were all coming to him for cures for various things as gentle on the bowels and protein rich. So he was kind of the first champion of peanut butter. And then in 1904, it was debuted, in a sense, at St. Louis's World's Fair. Big deal. Part of the reason why it wasn't quite gaining ground yet is that it was actually kind of difficult to make, right? Like you had to have a mortar and pestle. And then when you did, you would still have this like natural separation between the oil and the chunky bits of the peanut butter, kind of like when you've got like really natural peanut butter now. And that wasn't super appetizing. It also wasn't easy to preserve, so it would go off quite quickly. So at this point, like, it's just not landing, even though you have lots of different outlets, newspapers, magazines, things like that, talking about how great peanut butter is, right? Like it was sort of like the way avocado was in the last 10 years. Like everybody's like, oh, it's amazing. There were some really fascinating and frankly quite disgusting sounding recipes that were coming out of the early 20th century for peanut butter, for things like peanut butter loaf, which involved 2 cups of chopped olives and a teaspoon of onion juice added to the peanut butter.
Linda says the first recorded peanut butter and jelly recipe was printed in a Boston magazine in 1901. But it wasn't until the 1920s, with the invention of both hydrogenated oils and industrial peanut butter machines, that you could buy it commercially in jars. And finally, in 1927, sliced bread was born.
There was an inventor called Otto Frederick Rohrwader who designed this automatic bread slicing machine that absolutely revolutionized the baking industry. And by 1933, 80% of the bread that was made by American bakeries was sold pre-sliced, cut by this machine. This is incredible. Like, this is why we say the best thing since sliced bread. So now You've suddenly got all of the elements that need to be in place for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It just takes off.
According to the National Peanut Board, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches really took off after World War II. Their website says peanut butter and jelly were on the U.S. military ration menus. Peanut butter was a high-protein, shelf-stable ingredient and easily portable on long marches. There was a product by Welch's called Grape-A-Lade that had already accompanied soldiers in the First World War. And then there was the pre-sliced bread. When soldiers came home from war, they brought the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches home with them. Kids loved them. It was easy for the parents to make and instantly became a school lunch classic. America has spent nearly a century in love with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But to Linda's deep chagrin, her American influence has not swayed her children's taste.
My children, they were both born here, and therefore they are British, they don't really understand the appeal either. And I've tried. And I've given them sort of all iterations, I feel like, of sort of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. They would prefer a jam sandwich, which is a very British thing.
When we come back, we are mostly moving on from PB&Js. Mostly, Kevin is going to share his last meal. Kevin grew up in Overland Park, Kansas, a suburb outside Kansas City. He started playing in bands as a freshman in high school, but eventually dropped out, got his GED, and moved to Brooklyn when he was 18 years old. By 19, he was playing in the band The Woods with musicians 10 years his senior. Eventually, he moved to LA and then back to Overland Park, where he could afford to buy a house. But whenever Kevin goes back to New York, whenever he has a chance to visit Brooklyn, he likes to eat through his old stomping grounds. What is the Bedford Stomp?
The Bedford Stomp. That's a great question. The Bedford Stomp, so like I said, I used to live in Williamsburg. When I go back, I kind of like to do this thing. So the Bedford Stomp, if it were to go perfectly, I would get on maybe an 11 a.m. flight in Kansas City, and I would land, I guess, around 2 or 3 in New York. I will not have eaten the whole day, and I'll be really hungry. I'll go to Bedford and I'll go to Joe's Pizza. I'll get just a plain slice, because that's the best slice that you can get in any New York pizzeria, and a fountain soda Sprite. And then I'll walk up to North 7th, just a truck that's at North 7th in Bedford, and it's been there for forever, and I really love it. And I'll get 2 tacos there. If I'm really feeling crazy, which I think I've only ever done this once, I'll go to Oasis and get a falafel afterwards, that's too much food at that point.
Yeah.
That's like the super stomp. But yeah, the Bedford Stomp, those 2 tacos and a slice of pizza, it's the best.
What would your last meal be?
Okay, so as I've told you, this is something I've discussed with so many people, and I love this. I guess I'll just go appetizer, entree, and dessert.
Okay.
And for my appetizer, I think I would have a peanut butter and jelly as an appetizer. And then the dessert would be Bluebell cookies and cream ice cream, which is what I grew up with, which is the best. And to drink, I think I would have a Coca-Cola and a Miller Lite. Okay, so for the entree, the thing that it's really all about, I think I would have just a classic beef pho, which is my favorite food. When I've given that answer in the past, people have called it on it or something, or they're like, you wouldn't have.
Why?
Don't you want to eat something heavier? Pho is something I never had until I was the first time I had, I was 21 or something, and I didn't like it at first. My friend Lucas, shout out to Lucas Crane, he showed it to me, and I was like, what is this strange soup? It's so weird. There's tendons in here, and I grew up in the Midwest, and I didn't try a lot of food until I moved to New York. But it was one of those foods that literally a week later, I was like, I don't know why, but I want that soup. What was it called? And then from there, it's become my favorite food. I think because of touring and because I'm a singer, and often it's soothing for the throat, it's just a perfect food. But it also does give me that sensation and that feeling of getting really full, and it's hearty and it's very comforting. Yeah, I think that would be my last meal.
It's so good. And I think people saying, it's not substantial, not heavy enough, it's kind of sneakily substantial, because the broth is infused with, tons of bones and collagen, and it has all of this meaty stuff infused into it. And then you have the herbaceousness of all the herbs on top, the spices. I don't know. I think it's just the smell of it. It's so good.
Very medicinal too, which is
yeah.
And when something like that like when you're eating and you also feel like the food is healing, it has this healing aspect to it. I think that's, it's such a wonderful way to feel.
In Seattle, my favorite fact is that we have more pho restaurants than Starbucks.
Great pho up there in the Pacific Northwest.
Really good pho. Yeah. How do you dress yours?
The Brussels sprouts and
the bean sprouts.
The bean sprouts, sorry. Not the Brussels sprouts. I've never had pho in my life. I'm this is all a lie. The only thing I don't do is the jalapeno, especially when I'm on tour, because I don't want to eat something too spicy. And then of course the lime. I went to Vietnam. I was playing shows in Australia and Indonesia last year, and we went to Vietnam, me and some bandmates, just as a vacation afterwards. And it was a really big deal for me. It was also very inspired by Bourdain, because he loved Hanoi, and it's one of his favorite places. And it's a very big deal for me to go to sort of the source and have pho there. It did make me cry, as my bandmates Liam and Kocheme as my witnesses. We went to this place and we had this pho. And there, I don't know if you've ever been, but you've been?
I've been, yeah.
It's so wonderful. Did you get the donuts that they serve with the?
Yeah. Well, what I learned, and we actually went to Anthony Bourdain's favorite place.
The Obama place?
Oh, yeah. The Obama place. Yeah.
Yeah. We went there as well. So good. Well,
it was interesting, I thought, to learn that the pho in the north is different than the pho in the south. And I think it was the southern pho, like in Ho Chi Minh City, that is what we tend to have here in Seattle or maybe in the States, that has a lot more flavor, like a lot stronger of the star anise and all of that. And I felt like up north, it was a little bit of like a clear, lighter broth without all of the accoutrement. And I love how they eat it for breakfast. Like that's basically when you eat it. It's so good.
That's another thing I love about pho in general, is that it can be a great breakfast. Like it's just good anytime. So the first bowl of pho that we had, actually, because we had a layover in Ho Chi Minh City, so it was in the airport, which was so wonderful, where you're like, oh my God, like there's this great pho restaurant in this airport. That was emotional, and that was like, oh my God, this is so good. Yeah, so good. It's the best.
Why did it make you emotional when you were eating pho in Vietnam?
For so many different reasons. It was like my love for Anthony Bourdain. And then I really, really was moved. I really loved Hanoi. I really loved Vietnam. And, you're a professional musician, you get to travel the world, and it is exhausting. Like it's incredibly, and it's like, I get older, it's more and more exhausting. You're just mainly in an airport or on a bus or in a van or whatever. And you're in these small, tiny confines, eating terrible food. You forfeit any sort of healthy routine or normal sleep or normal eating patterns or whatever, relationships, all of that kind of goes to the wayside. And food for me, and getting to have that experience, of being at the source of my favorite food and getting to experience it, just very emotional. And so, just being there with my friends, we traveled, it was after this long tour, and then you have that and you're like, oh my God, it's all worth it for this bowl of soup.
And that was Kevin Morby's last meal. Kevin has a couple tour dates in June, and then he goes back out on the road in October. You can find a link in the show notes to check out his music and his tour dates. Thanks to Len Kretschmann, co-inventor of Uncrustables. Len's daughters have now joined the family business, and they are selling a new sandwich product to schools.
What we do is we grill the bread with butter. The customer buys it, they put their cheese on it, put it in it, pop it in the convection oven for 3 minutes, and they can make hundreds of these grilled cheese sandwiches for their kids.
Thanks to journalist Linda Rodriguez McRobbie. What is your perfect peanut butter sandwich?
To be really, really honest, I think my favorite is still grape jelly, smooth peanut butter on Wonder Bread. There is something about how it sticks in your teeth. It's a classic experience.
Your Last Meal is a product of Seattle's Cascade PBS. This episode was produced with Maliha Syed and mixed and mastered by Sarah Bernard. Original theme music by Prom Queen. I created, host, and co-produce Your Last Meal. If you want to make sure and get every episode of Your Last Meal and The Leftovers, which is our little mini episode that airs every other week, make sure you're subscribed. And if you like Your Last Meal, please leave a review in Apple Podcasts. Let me read you a little review that we got recently from El Castel. They gave a lovely 5-star review, and here's a little snippet from their sweet review. I can't believe it took me so long to check out Rachel's show. Every episode is such a delight, even those featuring guests I've not heard of or don't think I'll enjoy hearing from. Thanks, El Castel. Not only does leaving a review make my day, it pushes the podcast into the algorithm so more people can discover it. I'm Rachel Belle, and this is Your Last Meal.